If only they knew why she was crying in the marketplace. They say that a person's eyes are the windows to their soul, but in the village of Otun, the eyes of one girl were seen as a curse. I stood in the very center of the bustling marketplace, my feet bare against the hot, red dust. Around me, the air was thick with the scent of roasted corn, dried fish, and the loud shouts of traders. But I did not trade. I did not speak. I simply stood there and I wept. For 7 long years, my face had been a riverbed for constant tears. The villagers called me the silent weeper, and their kindness had long ago dried up. Children ran past me, throwing pebbles and chanting that I was a demon child who brought bad luck to their parents' business. The elders shook their heads, whispering that my madness was a gift from an angry spirit. I heard every word, every laugh, and every cruel remark, but I could not answer them. My throat felt as though it were filled with dry sand, and my lips were sealed by a power I could not fight. I just stood there, my violet eyes clouded with a sorrow that did not belong to me, waiting for the one person who knew the truth. Every afternoon, the crowd would suddenly part like a field of grass before a strong wind. The royal trumpets would sound, and Queen Ife would emerge from her golden palanquin. She was a woman of legendary beauty, her skin as smooth as polished ebony and her eyes as bright as the morning star. To the people of Otun, she was a goddess of mercy and charity. She would walk straight toward me, her silk wrappers rustling against the ground, while the villagers watched in awe. With a look of deep, fake pity on her perfect face, she would reach into her beaded pouch and pull out a single copper coin. She would place it in my trembling hand, making sure everyone saw her kindness. "Poor, broken Zora," she would coo softly, her voice like honey. "May the gods one day dry your eyes." The crowd would cheer for their saintly queen, praising her for helping a wretched thing like me. But when she leaned close, her breath cold against my ear, she would whisper the truth. "Keep weeping, my little mirror," she would, as so only I could hear. "Every tear you drop keeps my face young and my heart hidden. Cry until your soul is empty." If only they knew that 7 years ago, the queen and I were like sisters. I was Zora, the finest weaver in the land, and Ife was a beautiful girl with an ugly ambition. We spent our days by the river, sharing dreams of the future. I used my loom to create fabrics that looked like woven moonlight, while Ife practiced her smiles in the water's reflection. She was always obsessed with her looks, terrified that time would one day steal her charm. One night, she came to my hut, trembling with an unnatural excitement. She told me she had visited the forest spirit at the edge of the forbidden woods. She said the spirit had offered her a pact for eternal beauty and a crown. All she needed was a living mirror, someone to hold her rot, her aging, and the weight of every bad thing she would ever do. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, until she pulled out a long, black needle that hummed with a dark light. Before I could scream, she pricked my tongue and then my heart. The world went dark, and when I woke, my voice was gone, but my eyes were leaking. I was now the vessel for her darkness. For 7 years, I lived in a prison of salt and water. I slept in a small hut near the pig pens, exhausted by the sheer weight of the queen's hidden sins. You see, I was not crying because I was sad about my own life. I was the living mirror. Every time Queen Ife lied to her council, a fresh tear would burn my cheek. Every time she stole from the village treasury to buy rare jewels, my eyes would swell. When she secretly ordered the execution of a rival, I would sob for 3 days straight without stopping. The villagers thought I was mad, but I was simply the physical evidence of their queen's secret corruption. My violet eyes, once my proudest feature, had become a dull, aching violet, reflecting the bruised nature of Ife's soul. I wanted to scream to the traders, to the mothers, and to the guards that their beautiful queen was a monster, but the cursed needle had done its work well. My silence was her greatest weapon. She thrived on the village's praise, growing more beautiful with every year. While I withered away in the marketplace, a shadow of the girl I used to be. The weight of the secret grew heavier as the queen's daughter, Princess Kalu, reached the age of marriage. The palace was filled with joy, and the kingdom prepared for a wedding that would last 7 days. But as the preparations began, I felt a new, terrifying sensation in my chest. It was a sharp, biting pain, like cold iron being driven into my ribs. My tears turned thick and hot, almost like wax. I knew what this meant. The pact with the forest spirit was expiring. To keep her beauty for another 20 years and to ensure her daughter's marriage brought more power, a new sacrifice was needed. The forest spirit did not want a weaver this time. It wanted royal blood, or perhaps something even more precious. As I stood in the marketplace, the heat of the sun beating down on my head, I saw Queen Ife watching me from her balcony. Her eyes were no longer filled with mockery. They were filled with a desperate, predatory hunger. She was planning something final, something that would end my life and seal my mouth forever. She needed the leak to stop so she could start a new cycle of deception. One morning, the marketplace was unusually quiet. The usual chatter was replaced by the heavy boots of royal guards. They marched straight to my spot, their faces grim. Leading them was the Queen's head guard, a man who had always looked at me with a mix of disgust and confusion. He grabbed my withered arm and threw me to the ground. "Zora, the silent weeper," he announced loudly so all the traders could hear. "You are accused of royal theft. The Queen's ancestral diamond, the heart of the kingdom, has been found hidden beneath your sleeping mat." The crowd gasped, and a wave of anger swept through the marketplace. I knew she was bad luck. A fruit seller screamed, throwing a rotten tomato that hit my shoulder. I tried to shake my head, to gesture that I was innocent, but the guards dragged me away. I looked toward the palace and saw Queen Ife standing there, her hand over her heart in a gesture of fake heartbreak. She was framing me. If I were executed for theft, the living mirror would die, and her sins would be buried with me. The villagers cheered as I was hauled toward the dungeons. The dungeon was cold and smelled of damp earth and old bones. I sat in the corner of my cell, the chains heavy on my wrists. My eyes were still leaking, the tears falling onto the stone floor with a soft pitter-patter sound. I realized then that Ife was terrified. She knew that the older I got, the harder it was for me to contain her darkness. Lately, my tears had started to take on colors, dark grays and muddy reds, showing the depth of her recent crimes. She couldn't risk anyone seeing that. In the darkness of the cell, I thought of my father, a simple woodcutter who had told me that truth is like water, always finds a way out. I closed my eyes and prayed to the spirits of the ancestors. I did not ask for my life to be saved. I only asked that the village know the truth. I wanted them to know that the girl they mocked was the only reason their queen looked so holy. As I prayed, the black needle's mark on my tongue began to throb. The magic was reacting to my desperation, and the air in the cell grew thick with the smell of ozone and forest rain. The day of the trial arrived with a scorching sun that seemed to demand a sacrifice. The entire village of Otun gathered in the great square, forming a massive circle of angry faces. In the center stood the executioner's block, a heavy piece of dark that had seen many endings. I was brought out, my hair matted and my clothes torn. I could barely stand, but the guards forced me to my knees. High above us, on a raised dais, sat Queen Ife and the royal council. She was dressed in shimmering white, looking like a vision of purity. Beside her sat the young Princess Kalu, who looked at me with eyes that were full of genuine sadness. Unlike her mother, the girl had a soul that had not yet been sold. The queen stood up, her voice echoing across the silent square. "Citizens of Otun," she began, her tone trembling with practiced grief. "It pains my heart to see this girl, whom I have fed and cared for, turn into a common thief. But the law of the land is absolute. For the crime of stealing the royal heart, the penalty is death." The executioner stepped forward, his axe gleaming in the sunlight. I looked up at the sky, the bright blue burning my eyes. I didn't feel fear. I felt a strange sense of peace. The living mirror was about to break, and I knew that when a mirror breaks, it releases everything it has captured. The crowd began to chant, "End the curse! End the curse!" They believed that my death would bring an end to the bad luck I supposedly brought to the market. Queen Ife leaned forward, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She thought she had won. She thought the pact would be sealed by my blood. The executioner raised his axe high, the muscles in his arms tensing. I took one last deep breath and looked straight at Ife. I didn't look away. I wanted her to see my violet eyes one last time. As the axe began its downward swing, I didn't close my eyes. I felt a surge of energy from the black needle's mark, a power so ancient and cold that it froze the air around me. I knew that the truth was finally ready to leak out. The axe didn't hit my neck. Just as the blade was an inch away, a bolt of violet lightning shot from my eyes, striking the metal and shattering into 1,000 pieces. The crowd screamed and fell back. I felt a sharp, tearing sensation in my throat, and for the first time in 7 years, I opened my mouth and let out a sound. It wasn't a scream. It was a roar of rushing water. But the most incredible thing was the blood. A single drop had fallen from a small cut on my arm onto the red dust of the marketplace. The moment that drop of blood touched the earth, the ground began to ripple like a pond. The air shimmered and a massive, cinematic image began to form in the sky above the square. It was a memory, vivid, colorful, and loud. The villagers gasped as they saw a younger version of me and a younger version of Ife standing by the river. They watched as Ife pulled out the black needle. They heard her voice, clear as a bell, making the pact of the forest spirit. The living mirror was finally reflecting its images outward for the whole world to see. The flashback in the sky continued, moving with the speed of a rushing river. The villagers watched in stunned silence as they saw 7 years of hidden history. They saw Queen Ife whispering to the forest spirit. They saw her stealing the very diamond she had accused me of taking, hiding it under my mat while I slept. But more importantly, they saw the weight I had been carrying. Every time a tear had fallen from my eyes in the marketplace, the image showed exactly what sin had caused it. They saw the queen ordering the secret poisoning of the neighboring king. They saw her taking bribes from the wealthy and letting the poor starve. They saw her laughing at the villagers behind closed doors, calling them clowns in her theater. The people of Otun looked at the sky and then at their queen, their faces turning from confusion to horror. The mask was not just slipping. It was being incinerated by the light of the truth. I stood up slowly, the chains on my wrists snapping like dry twigs. My voice was returning, a low hum in my chest that grew stronger with every passing second. Queen Ife's reaction was one of pure, unadulterated terror. She tried to stand, to shout for her guards to kill me, but her voice came out as a raspy croak. The pact was breaking, and the rot she had stored in me for 7 years was rushing back to its rightful owner. In front of the entire village, the transformation began. It was a sight that would be whispered about for generations. Her smooth, ebony skin began to wrinkle and fold like old parchment. Her long, lustrous hair turned white and fell out in clumps, blowing away in the wind. Her straight, regal back bent into a sharp curve, and her youthful hands became gnarled like the roots of a dead tree. In less than a minute, the beautiful goddess of Otun had withered into a tiny, gasping hag who looked like she was 100 years old. She collapsed on her throne, her expensive white silks hanging loosely around her shrunken frame. The villagers backed away, some falling to their knees in fear. The living mirror was empty, and the queen was finally forced to face the reflection of her own soul. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the birds sang. I stood in the center of the square, no longer the silent weeper, but a woman restored. My violet eyes were now clear and bright, glowing with a light that was no longer burdened by salt and sorrow. I looked at the withered creature on the throne, the woman who had once been my friend. I felt no hatred, only a deep, hollow pity. The villagers began to murmur, their anger turning toward the queen. "She lied to us," a woman shouted. "She used Zora to hide her sins." The guards dropped their spears, refusing to protect the monster they now saw. But as the crowd began to surge forward, wanting to tear the queen apart, I stepped into their path. I raised my hand, and my voice finally broke through the air, clear and powerful. "Stop!" I commanded. The village froze. They looked at me, the girl they had mocked for years, and they saw a queenly authority that surpassed any crown. "There is more you need to know," I said, my voice echoing. "The truth is not yet finished with this house." I turned my gaze to Princess Kalu, who was weeping at the foot of her mother's throne. The girl was terrified, watching her mother turn into a monster before her eyes. If only you knew, I said softly, looking at the princess. The queen did not just plan to kill me, to hide her secrets. She knew the forest spirit demanded a new sacrifice to keep the palace grand. She had already prepared the ritual for your wedding night. Princess! The girl looked up, her face pale. What do you mean? She whispered. I pointed to the sky, where the final part of the flashback was playing. It showed the queen in her private chamber only 2 nights ago, painting a symbol on her daughter's wedding veil with the same dark magic she had used on me. The pact required the purity of a new generation. Ife had intended to turn her own daughter into the next vessel of her darkness, ensuring that the queen remained powerful while the princess became the new silent victim. The betrayal was so deep that even the most hardened soldiers in the square wept with rage. The queen had been willing to sell her own child for a few more years of beauty. The princess stood up, her eyes wide with a mix of grief and newfound strength. She looked at her mother, the withered, gasping thing on the throne, and then at me. She walked down the steps of the dais and knelt at my feet. Zora, she said, her voice trembling, you carried my mother's sins to protect this kingdom, even when we mocked you. You are the true heart of Otun. One by one, the villagers followed. The fruit seller who had thrown the tomato, the children who had thrown pebbles, the elders who called me mad. They all knelt in the dust of the marketplace. The very place where I had been humiliated for 7 years had become the place of my greatest honor. They begged for my forgiveness, their voices a low hum of collective shame. I looked at them and realized that they, too, had been mirrors. They reflected the queen's fake beauty and my fake madness. We had all been living in a world of illusions, and the tears I had shed were the only real things in the village. I told them to stand, for I wanted no one to be beneath me ever again. The aftermath of the trial was a whirlwind of change. The royal council immediately declared Ife unfit to rule, though the woman could barely move, let alone lead. They wanted to execute her, to end the life of the woman who had nearly destroyed the village's soul. But I stepped forward once more. No, I said firmly. Death is too easy a release for someone who spent her life hiding from herself. She wanted to be the center of the marketplace. Let her stay there. I suggested a punishment that was far more fitting. The council agreed, seeing the wisdom in my words. We stripped the queen of her silks and her jewels. We dressed her in the same tattered rags I had worn for 7 years. We led her to the center of the marketplace, to the very spot where I had stood. We placed a small wooden bowl at her feet. From this day on, I announced to the kingdom, Ife shall be the marketplace beggar. She shall not speak, for she has no truth to tell. And she shall not cry, for her heart is too dry to produce even a single tear of regret. As the years passed, the village of Otun transformed. Princess Kalu was crowned the new queen, and she ruled with a kindness that was real, not manufactured. I became her chief advisor, the speaker of truth. We built a school where children were taught that beauty is found in character, not in a mirror. The marketplace remained the heart of the village, but it was a different place now. It was a place of honesty and fair trade. And in the center of it all, people would pass an old, withered woman who sat in the dust. She was a strange sight, a person who looked like a living corpse but could not die. The villagers no longer threw pebbles or mocked her. They had learned their lesson. They simply looked at her and remembered the time of the silent weeper. They saw the woman who had wanted everything and ended up with nothing. Ife would sit there, her eyes wide and dry, watching the world move on without her. She was a warning to all who thought they could build a life on the suffering of others. I often go to the marketplace myself, not to gloat, but to remember. I stand where I used to stand and breathe in the air that is now clear the smell of dark magic. My violet eyes are still a reminder of the past, but they no longer ache. People sometimes ask me why I don't use my power to heal Ife, to give her back a small piece of her youth. I tell them that some wounds are necessary. Ife's withered state is not a curse. It is the truth of her life made visible. She is finally being seen for who she truly is. I realize that my 7 years of crying were not a waste. Those tears washed away the lies of a kingdom. They were the price of a future where children like Kalu could grow up without being sold by their own parents. I am no longer the girl who survives on pity. I am the woman who lives in the light. And every time I see a young girl weaving in the village, I smile, knowing that her voice will always be her own. The story of the silent weeper became a legend that traveled far beyond the borders of Otun. Travelers would come from distant lands just to see the marketplace and the woman who sat in the center. They would listen to the story told by the elders, a story of a girl whose tears held the secrets of a queen. They learned that justice is not always a sword. Sometimes it is a mirror. They learned that the most powerful thing in the world is not beauty or a crown, but the courage to stand in the truth, even when the world is throwing pebbles at you. As for me, I live a long and full life. I never married the prince, for I found a different kind of love, the love of a people who finally knew my worth. My father's old cloak, the one I had wrapped myself in during my darkest nights, became a royal relic, a symbol of endurance. And whenever the sun sets over the red dust of Otun, I look at the sky and thank the ancestors. If only they knew, I think to myself, why I was crying. But now they finally do. The final lesson I leave for you is this. Never judge a person by the tears they shed or the burden they carry. The world is often broken, and it needs people who are brave enough to hold the weight of that brokenness until the truth can be revealed. In Otun, we no longer call anyone crooked or mad. We look at the eyes, for the eyes never lie. We listen to the silence, for sometimes the loudest truths are told without a single word. Queen Ife lived for many more years, a silent witness to the happiness she had tried to steal. She saw the village prosper. She saw her daughter become a beloved leader. She saw the weaver she had betrayed become the most respected woman in the land. And in those quiet moments, when the marketplace was empty and the moon was full, I like to think that perhaps, just perhaps, a single drop of moisture finally found its way to her dry, old eyes. Not because of a pact, but because she finally understood the weight of what she had lost. But the truth, once revealed, can never be hidden again. The villagers often speak of the day the magic broke as the day of the great reflection. It serves as a calendar for our history. Everything is measured by how long it happened before or after the tears stopped. We have become a people of deep memory. We no longer value the smooth face that hides a sharp tongue. Instead, we value the hands at work and the hearts that feel. The marketplace, once a place of my shame, is now a sanctuary of our shared honesty. Every year, on the anniversary of the trial, we hold a festival of lights. We don't celebrate the queen's fall, but the weaver's rise. We light violet lamps that glow like the eyes of the girl who saved us. We tell the story to the young ones so they never forget that the silent weeper was actually the loudest voice in the kingdom. My legacy is not one of silk or fabrics, but of a transparency that keeps our leaders honest and our neighbors kind. The red dust of Otun remains, but it no longer feels like a weight on my feet. It feels like home. I remember the first time I spoke after the trial. It was to my old father's spirit, standing by the river where he used to cut wood. I told him I was sorry I couldn't save him, but I was glad I could save the village. I felt his presence in the rustle of the leaves, a warm sense of pride that filled my chest. I realized then that my father had always known I wasn't broken. He saw the violet eyes and knew they were meant for something greater than weaving. He knew that I was built to endure. The strength I gained from those 7 years of silence became my greatest asset in the royal court. I could read people's intentions just by looking into their eyes, for I had spent years studying the faces of the villagers from my spot in the market. I became a judge who could never be fooled, a counselor who always saw the hidden rot before it could spread. My life, which Ife tried to steal, became a shield for every person in Otun, and in that, I found a peace that no beauty pact could ever provide. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I walked past the old marketplace Beggar. Ife is much smaller now, her body shrinking with every passing year. I sometimes leave a small piece of bread or a cup of water in her bowl. She doesn't look at me, but I know she knows who I am. There is no more fire in her, only a cold, hollow stillness. I wonder if she remembers the river or the dreams we used to share. I wonder if she realizes that if she had just been content with her own beauty, we would still be sisters. But greed is a thirsty spirit. It always wants more than it can hold. Ife tried to hold the whole world in her mirror, and it shattered her. I am the only one who truly knows her story, and I am the one who ensures she is cared for. It is the final irony of our lives. The victim has become the caretaker of the monster, and in that act of mercy, I have finally washed away the last traces of the Black Needle's poison from my own soul. Queen Kalu often asks me if I miss the weaver I used to be. I tell her that I am still a weaver, but I no longer use thread. I weave the stories of our people. I weave the laws that protect the orphans. I weave the truth into the fabric of our daily lives. My hands may not be as nimble as they once were, but my spirit is stronger than any loom. I have learned that a life is not defined by what happens to you, but by what you do with it. I could have become a bitter woman, using my new power to hurt those who had mocked me. But I chose to be a bridge instead of a wall. I chose to use my voice to heal instead of to curse. That is a true moonflower of my journey. Not a magical plant from forest, but the kindness that grows in a heart that has known the greatest suffering. The people of Otun know this now, and they teach it to their children. We are a village of weavers, creating a tapestry of justice that will never fade. So, as I sit here by the fire, an old woman with violet eyes that have seen too much and yet not enough, I give you this story. Take it and hold it close. Remember that every person you see who is crying might be carrying a weight you cannot understand. Remember that the crooked ones may be the only ones standing straight in a world that has lost its way. And most of all, remember that the truth always finds its way to the marketplace. It may take 7 years. It may take a lifetime, but it will come. When it does, make sure you are standing on the side of the light. For if only you knew why the silent ones are weeping, you would not mock them. You would join them in their prayer for a better world. The sun is setting now over Otun, and the market is closing for the night. The red dust is settling, and the air is quiet. My tears are gone, but my story remains. What lesson do you take from the girl who cried the queen's sins? I hope it is a lesson of love.